They had fame, flashing cameras, and a future Hollywood promised would last forever. One film turned them into stars overnight. But then something went wrong. Studios turned cold. Scandals whispered. Doors slammed shut. No sequels, no comebacks, no explanations. Some were sabotaged, some silenced, and some simply erased by the system. Tonight, we uncover the shocking stories of 10 old Hollywood stars who vanished after just one hit film, and the brutal industry that decided they were no longer useful. Peg Entwistle is one of old Hollywood's most haunting what-ifs. Trained on Broadway and praised for her talent, she arrived in Hollywood full of promise. Her biggest film role came in 13 Women, 1932, where critics noted her quiet intensity. But behind the scenes, Peg struggled. Studios cut many of her scenes, contracts disappeared, and the Great Depression made acting jobs nearly impossible to find. Unlike other actresses, Peg lacked powerful studio backing, leaving her isolated in an industry that quickly discarded newcomers. Rejected from roles and drowning in self-doubt, she believed her career was already over. In 1932, after leaving a note expressing disappointment in herself, Peg climbed the Hollywoodland sign and jumped to her death. Ironically, shortly after her passing, a letter arrived offering her a film role. Today, Peg Entwistle remains a chilling symbol of Hollywood's cruelty and broken promises. Lizabeth Scott burst onto the screen with Dead Reckoning, 1947, instantly becoming the sultry face of film noir. Her smoky voice, icy beauty, and femme fatale persona made her unforgettable. However, Hollywood was unforgiving. Gossip columnists hinted at scandals, and her private life became studio ammunition against her. During the Red Scare era, rumors and associations were enough to end careers, especially for women. Though she continued acting, leading roles vanished quickly. Studios quietly replaced her with younger, more manageable actresses. By the mid-1950s, Scott stepped away from Hollywood almost entirely. She later admitted the industry felt hostile and suffocating. Despite her talent and popularity, Lizabeth Scott faded into obscurity, remembered more for whispers than performances. Her story highlights how reputation, true or false, could destroy a rising star overnight. John Gilbert was once one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. During the silent era, he rivaled Rudolph Valentino in popularity and starred in massive hits like The Big Parade. But his downfall came with the arrival of sound films. His first major talkie, His Glorious Night, 1929, was mocked for awkward dialogue and sound issues. Studio executives, particularly Louis B. Mayer, allegedly sabotaged Gilbert due to personal conflicts. His voice was not the problem, poor scripts and intentional damage were. Audiences turned cruel, studios withdrew support, and Gilbert's confidence collapsed. Alcohol worsened his struggles, and roles dried up. By the time Hollywood realized its mistake, it was too late. John Gilbert died at just 38, a fallen idol whose career was destroyed more by studio politics than talent. Linda Darnell became one of old Hollywood's most talked-about beauties after her breakout success in Forever Amber, 1947. Audiences were mesmerized by her striking looks and emotional intensity, and studios promoted her as the next unstoppable star. But behind the glamorous image, Linda's life was tightly controlled by studio executives who dictated her roles, public behavior, and even her personal relationships. Fame arrived fast, but support never followed. As Hollywood began favoring younger actresses, Linda found herself increasingly typecast and then ignored altogether. Struggling with depression, alcohol abuse, and a deep sense of isolation, she fought to reclaim her career but was repeatedly shut out. In 1965, tragedy struck when Linda Darnell died at just 41 after suffering severe burns in a house fire while trying to help others escape. Once adored by millions, she was quietly forgotten, another reminder of how old Hollywood could elevate stars overnight, then discard them without mercy. Sal Mineo became an overnight sensation with Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, earning an Academy Award nomination and instant teen idol status. His performance as the troubled, vulnerable Plato struck a nerve with young audiences and critics alike. Hollywood saw him as a symbol of teenage rebellion, but that image quickly became a trap. Studios repeatedly cast him in similar roles, limiting his range and growth as an actor. Off-screen, Mineo refused to fully conform to Hollywood's rigid expectations, and persistent rumors about his private life made studio executives uneasy in an era deeply intolerant of nonconformity. As a result, leading roles slowly disappeared. Though Sal continued delivering strong work on Broadway and in smaller film projects, mainstream Hollywood had already turned its back. By the late 1960s, his star had faded completely. In 1976, Sal Mineo was tragically murdered during a robbery, shocking fans worldwide. His disappearance from fame wasn't caused by lack of talent, but by an industry unwilling to accept difference. Terry Moore burst onto the Hollywood scene with Mighty Joe Young, 1949, a film that showcased her charm, innocence, and natural screen presence. At just 19 years old, she earned an Academy Award nomination, and critics predicted a long, glittering career ahead. But old Hollywood was ruthless to young actresses without powerful studio protection. Unlike contract stars shielded by major studios, Terry was left vulnerable to gossip, industry politics, and damaging rumors about her personal life. As the 1950s progressed, studios began offering her fewer leading roles, slowly pushing her into obscurity. Attempts to reinvent herself were met with indifference, as Hollywood favored younger faces and more controllable stars. Disillusioned, Terry gradually stepped away from the spotlight. Decades later, her brief appearance connected to the Mighty Joe Young legacy reminded audiences of the talent that once promised so much. Terry Moore's story is a clear example of how even Oscar-nominated stars could disappear overnight when Hollywood decided to move on. Brandon DeWilde became unforgettable after his heartbreaking performance as Joey in Shane, 1953. At just 11 years old, he delivered a level of emotional depth that stunned audiences and critics alike, instantly becoming one of the most beloved child actors of the era. Hollywood saw him as pure, innocent, and unforgettable, but that image became his biggest obstacle. As Brandon grew older, studios struggled to see him as anything other than the wide-eyed boy calling out Shane. The industry offered few strong adult roles, and interest in his career slowly faded. Unlike child stars who were carefully guided, Brandon was largely left to navigate adulthood on his own. He continued acting in smaller films and television, proving he still had talent, but the momentum was gone. In 1972, tragedy struck when Brandon DeWilde died in a car accident at just 30 years old. His career ended quietly, leaving Shane as both his greatest achievement and his lifelong shadow, a painful reminder of how old Hollywood often abandoned its child stars once the spotlight moved on. And Blythe stunned audiences with her powerful performance in Mildred Pierce, 1945, earning an Academy Award nomination at a remarkably young age. Critics praised her emotional intensity, and Hollywood insiders believed she was destined for long-term stardom. Unlike many of her peers, and possessed not only talent but also discipline, transitioning successfully into musicals and dramatic roles throughout the late 1940s. However, as the studio system tightened its grip, and faced a choice few actresses dared to make, Hollywood demanded complete control, long contracts, relentless schedules, and personal sacrifice. And chose a different path. She married, started a family, and gradually stepped away from major film roles. There was no scandal, no sudden tragedy, just a quiet withdrawal from the spotlight. While other stars burned out under pressure, and prioritized stability, faith, and personal happiness. Her disappearance wasn't due to failure, but independence. And Blythe's story reveals another harsh truth about old Hollywood: success was only rewarded if you were willing to give the industry everything, and she refused to do that. George Reeves achieved instant fame after starring as Superman in Superman and the Mole Men, 1951, becoming the face of America's first great TV superhero. Children adored him, merchandise exploded, and his image was everywhere. But the success came at a devastating cost. Casting directors could no longer see George Reeves as anything other than Superman. Serious film roles vanished, and Hollywood quietly shut its doors. Trapped by typecasting, Reeves grew frustrated and increasingly depressed, struggling financially despite his massive popularity. He reportedly disliked wearing the costume but felt imprisoned by it, knowing it was the only role keeping him employed. Behind the scenes, his personal life became complicated, filled with broken relationships and growing disillusionment with the industry. In 1959, Reeves was found dead from a gunshot wound in his home. The death was officially ruled a suicide, but inconsistencies fueled decades of speculation, rumors, and conspiracy theories. Whether driven by despair or darker circumstances, George Reeves died feeling trapped by the very role that made him immortal, proving that fame in old Hollywood could be just as destructive as failure.